And for the same, we will have with us Mr. Anand Sharma, Deputy Leader of Opposition, Rajya Sabha. Let's have a round of applause as Mr. Anand Sharma is joining us. He is the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Rajya Sabha. We will now be having the valedictory session. Welcome, sir. And joining him for this session will be Mr. Pavan Munjal and Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal. Welcome, sirs.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Anand Sharma, an old friend and a mentor to industry. He played a very active role in the last government, both on trade, commerce, and industry, not just inside India, but also being the point person for India's global trade negotiations. Some of you may remember that after the despondence the world had, that the world trade order seems to be dying, we saw with his personal intervention a complete revival of the round, which brought world trade center stage of all of the negotiations that was going on. So thank you very much for agreeing to be with us today, Mr. Sharma. We have always appreciated your candor, we've appreciated your support, and we appreciate how from only starting off as a politician, you have moved yourself into being a statesman, both within India and we've traveled together in many countries. I've heard you speak at many places. As you have been to the Mindmine Summit in earlier years, you're aware that this looks at issues to do with India, Indians, Indian economy, and India's global relations. We've had a day and a half of very active and very engaging sessions, and we've covered a very wide spectrum. The broad theme this year is asking the question, is 2015 to 2025 India's decade? For a long time, people have been saying India's turn will come. It's clearly believed across the world this is Asia's century. And within Asia, it is well known that the three giants of economy, at least, would be Japan, China, and India. And India, with its old civilization, has its roots in trade and commerce and in global relations. So is this now the time when we can expect India to play a much bigger role in the global economy? Since 1991, when the current phase of reform started, which was of course started by your government, we have seen many changes, both big and small, take place, which have moved us forward down this road, bringing us to a place where we can genuinely have Indian enterprises look at themselves as global enterprises. We can have India play a role on global fora, whether it's to do with defense or with social issues. We do, however, continue to have many challenges on poverty, health, education, on the basic human index. So we have looked at this issue from many perspectives. We had sessions on economy, both the global and the Indian economy. We had a session on infrastructure. We had a session on skills, one on technology. We had a session on youth. We had a session on differently abled and their role in society as being an equally responsive and responsible member of society. So in this manner, we've tried to look at India going forward from all different perspectives. So it would be useful for us to hear from you what you believe is India's strength today. What are the challenges to India becoming a globally leading nation over the next 10 years? And if this was 2025, where do you think we would be as a nation? Where do you think we would be as a people? It's on.
Thank you, Sunil, for your very warm words of welcome. I do remember in the past when I've come for a Mindmine Summit, and this year, what you have just mentioned, and I've gone through the program, the list of speakers. It has been an enriching exchange, and I'm sure that this helps in having a better understanding of where we are And perhaps what the thinking is, those who are either in policy making, law making, and decision making in governance. First, I would like to say that when we take a long-term view of where India perhaps can reach, there's no doubt in my mind that this country has inherent strength, wisdom, and resilience to take it forward. Our biggest strength are people, particularly the youth. Country of 1.25 billion, the second most populated in the world, but 20% of the world's children live in our country. They are the future. They are also aspirational. The young people are aspirational. They are impatient, they are idealistic. But if we invest, continue to invest in the youth by giving them access to good institutions, that is the most potent tool to empower India through its people. And when we say invest in institutions, it's education, because there is nothing more powerful to overcome many of the baggages of a long history of India's colonial past, discrimination, denial, and deprivation. But if we educate our people, all, particularly the underprivileged children, I think we'll be moving forward in the right direction. It was not for no reason that India's first Prime Minister, who was a global statesman, a front-ranking leader of a freedom struggle, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, decided to create institutions of excellence. It was just in a short period of time that we had Indian Institutes of Technology, Indian Institutes of Management, Indian Institutes of Science, Nuclear Science, Space Science, all established, and the only one, NID, now which will become 5. And it was in UPA 1, because by that time India was doing well, the economy was doing very well, and a decision was made to more than double these institutions of excellence to make us globally competitive. Because as you would know better than me, that we have to, in today's world, improve the benchmarks, the standards, when it comes to manufacturing. That's the way for India to go. Because you cannot create jobs for the aspirational youth anywhere else, as there is going to be a movement, and that is already taking place, away from the villages, away from agriculture, because agriculture cannot sustain 60% of the population in this big country. And for that, it's important that we invest in R&D, we invest in vocational training, and at the high end, you have the Indian Institutes of Science, the triple ITs, and you have the the National Institutes of Design, which we are multiplying, as I just referred to, from 1 to 5, and that was taken forward during our time. This is one area, the last one, where I was directly responsible. And also we were, as you would recall, very much connected and very much committed also to vocational training and skills. And the CII, which you were the president, and the Indian industry as such, was on the same page, and we were coordinating, and there have been many initiatives taken. For such a big country, whether those initiatives were adequate or not, that remains a question mark. My concern is that if we have to achieve the objective and harness the true potential of our people, there should never be any deviation or dilution. There has to be continuity and predictability when it comes to the course, when it comes to the policies. Because the governments come and go, that happens in democracies, that happens in any institution. But we must not move in fits and starts, keep on changing or disowning what the predecessors do. After all, in one decade, it's a fact that India's GDP quadrupled. So when we demitted office, it was 2.2 billion or trillion US dollars. We are 2.3 trillion US dollars economy today, roughly speaking. Which may be a little bit more or a little bit less. But in PPP terms, yes, we are the third largest. We are very much behind China, very much behind Japan when it comes to innovation, when it comes to technology which is and manufacturing, assimilating high-end technologies and getting connected to the global production chains, which India has to do. Because in a world which is interdependent, world which is interlinked by technology, you have no other choice but to do it. So therefore, what we were doing is being taken forward. I'm not saying that this government is not doing, but it's not a question of just changing names, which is needless exercise. We had decided to build 4 dedicated industrial corridors. And the work has moved forward reasonably well, thanks to the support and partnership of Japan on the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor and the Delhi-Mumbai Freight Corridor. Yes, may have been delays, which always happens in India, but then the Southern Corridor also is taking off from Chennai to Bengaluru, but we decided to take it, as you know, to Chitradurga. And the third, where UK has come as a partner, the BMEC, the Bengaluru-Mumbai Economic Corridor, which gets the benefit from the first manufacturing city which to be launched. Out of the 16 names, which you know, so I won't go into more details, but under the national manufacturing policy, to my mind, after the 1991 liberalization and our integration with the global economy, the most important policy rollout was the national manufacturing policy. Once implemented, it will be empowering and transformative. And that has the objective to create these standalone integrated greenfield industrial cities of the future. India cannot have too many cities. When I hear about it, I get a bit worried. 100 smart cities, 200 cities. No. We have only 51 cities in India today with a population of million plus. And we also know that with the movement towards urban areas, the pressure is on the infrastructure, and infrastructure is not there even in the country's capital or in Mumbai or in Kolkata or in Chennai. So that is where we have to look at. But when these corridors are there, you'll have faster movement. You have to expand your port capacities. You have to bring down transaction costs. And the last decision which we had taken, one of the few, was the Amritsar-Kolkata Industrial Corridor. That was a very important one. So, and under the national manufacturing policy, perhaps it's relevant to mention here, we created some special provisions. First, invoking a dormant article of our constitution, Article 143Q1A, I've referred to that earlier, to declare these names as standalone authorities for our approval purposes. We have effectively put in place there what the industry wants. That's a single window approval mechanism to manage through the SPVs with industry and the government together with the senior officials who have to take the decisions. The issue of land stands addressed there. The issue of labor stands addressed there for under the NMP. At least for these areas, you don't have issues because land is the equity of the state, not to be alienated, shall remain vested, and the trunk infrastructure is being entirely funded by the government of India. So I think that if we do this, we'll be able to perhaps achieve our objective of making India a manufacturing hub of the world, which India has the potential, and also a workshop of the world. And through these corridors, you'll be able to connect with the rest of the world. It's not only within the country, the connectivity and faster movement, but you make your exports, manufactured exports, globally more competitive, and you connect to the global chains. And I think that I'm pretty hopeful. The challenges, if I may briefly mention, Sunil, are the delays. Despite our best of intent in the other areas outside these corridors which will come up or outside the NIMS, the delays have not been cut out. And unless and until we address this issue of red tape and have comprehensive administrative reforms so that the decision making in an integrated manner is faster, perhaps in our own industry, which has demonstrated its potential, capacity and leadership by stepping out and engaging with the world in a manner which was full of confidence and made India proud when our industry leaders stepped out and made their institutions, their enterprises global. So surely, I think that, to my mind, India should be making a defining influence in the 21st century world, particularly in the coming decades.
Thank you. There's an old proverb which says that the past is where you learn the lesson. The future is where you will apply it. Don't give up in the middle. We've had this experience now for the last few decades in India that when a party is in government, it supports a certain initiative or some initiatives. And when the same party goes into opposition, it has shown on a number of occasions, it's actually opposed the very same issues even in parliament. And we've seen this happen with all major parties now, including yours and with the what was the earlier principal opposition party, the BJP, when they were in opposition and when they came into government. Do you think we can see any time in the future where the principal major parties come to a common agreement and understanding on 5 or 10 things which are clearly understood and known to be good for the nation and support them both inside and outside parliament, while the rest of the politicking continues on myriad other issues which are there?
Well, good question. It's true that today we have the BJP with a majority of its own, and after 1989, it's the first time. But it doesn't mean that the previous governments, whether 91 to 96, and later for 10 years when we were in office, we didn't have a majority. But yes, it was a coalition. Like Vajpayeeji's government was a coalition. So were the two UPA governments. And within a coalition, perhaps it's more difficult sometimes to manage the contradictions and the different ideologies. But yet, policy initiatives were taken and decisions were made. This country, you're right, has suffered in the past from partisan gridlock, which has delayed the pace of the movement at which India needs to go forward. No legislation, key legislation, could be passed, but for many important ones. But when you look at the opening up of the economy to more sectors for foreign direct investment, including insurance, including multi-brand retail, the initiatives that we had taken, those were opposed to thin nail. In fact, on FDI and multi-brand retail, I still look back, it was a bruising battle, which you know, and the government was sought to be pulled down. There was vote in Lok Sabha, vote in Rajya Sabha, but we believed in what we were doing and we accepted the challenge. We were willing even to risk our government. Similarly for the nuclear agreement. Now today when the present government is in office, they agreed that all what we were doing was actually in India's national interest, whether it was the nuclear agreement, whether it was the opening up of the FDI insurance sector, whether it was the Aadhaar or the direct transfer of benefits. So all that for what we were pilloried and opposed has been accepted. So I'm very happy that this is happening. But you can please give some credit to the present opposition that unlike what we witnessed in last 7 years, ending 16th of May 2014, this time, a lot of work is being done in Parliament. It's not because of their majority in the Lok Sabha. They don't have a majority in the Rajya Sabha. We are the ones who have the majority. We are the largest party in the House. So if laws are being passed, if insurance bill was passed, the credit belongs to us. We brought it, they blocked it. If this is passed during their regime, it is again because of us. So that I want to set the record straight. We will certainly have a bipartisan understanding when it comes to India's national interest and national initiatives. But just to flag one thing, it's very important for the ruling dispensation to give up the electoral hostility, which is there, built up. There's a lot of hype and exchanges which are very sharp can be bitter also. But once the elections are over, people have given the verdict, one party sits in government and the other sits in opposition, then it becomes the responsibility of the Prime Minister and his government to reach out to the opposition to create an understanding.
I want to interrupt you here. And in fact, this is exactly what people are saying. Please go ahead and take the credit, but do support those issues in Parliament. That somehow is not completely happening here. How can that work?
I'll tell you, that's where I was just now. That for major issues, if there is an area where some clarity is required, some change is required, some course correction is required, the mature way is to sit across the table. But it is for the government. The opposition cannot convene an all-party meeting with the to invite the government. It's always be the government which has to do it. If the transaction of business has to take place in an orderly manner in the Parliament, it's again the responsibility of the government. But this government, I'm sorry to say, and you must know, until now has not reached out to the opposition. The hangover of election needs to end for the new chapter to be written together. You cannot expect that kind of understanding to be built if there is constant abuse and heaping of accusations and humiliation of the predecessor Prime Minister, of the previous governments. Then there is bound to be a reaction to that. And that's what we tell the government, that please stop this. And I gave you a few examples. If you look at the last 4 years, if I have to be precise, these published statistics, these are in book form, both by the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, you will see that more work has been done by our Parliament, more laws have been cleared, more policy decisions have been endorsed in the last 10, 11 months than what had happened in the previous 48 months. So this is a fact, and it can improve. No, I'm a politician, and I can't change that.
That's okay. That's okay.
I will have to.
Yeah.
This is not
That's
politics.
okay.
I'm stating facts.
Yeah.
And the facts have to be spoken.
That's all right. That's
So
fine.
I don't
That's
need your permission, sir.
fine. So, that's okay.
Yeah,
That's
please.
fine. You're entitled to your opinion. So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
You see, I come from a political culture where we don't abuse and we don't insult our opponents. But stating of facts is something which all educated people or interested people are aware. People who read, people who stay connected. And I think it's my duty to put things in a correct perspective. And in a democracy, neither the government can be told nor the opposition can be dictated to. I'm very firm and clear.
So there were 2 or 3 big initiatives that were launched by you personally. You mentioned 2 of them already. Global trade was another one, we were doing a series of FTAs, preferential trade agreements, etc., were going on. There was, from industry side, a pushback, if you remember, in the middle of these, saying that some of these are good, but many of them actually end up being against the interest of how Indian industry wants to operate or can be successful. What is your view on FTAs? Do you think it's a good idea for us to do individual FTAs, to do regional trade block agreements, or become part of the super trade agreements that are now currently being discussed? As you know, there is the new animal now on the horizon. And is there a risk of our getting left out if we are not part of one of those?
It's a very good question. Because in 1995, the WTO was formed. And you referred to earlier about the historic breakthrough in Bali in December 2013, when we were able to reach the first agreements of the WTO after almost 18 years since it was established. And the credit was given to India. At the same time, there have been moves to have multilaterals and plurilaterals outside the framework of the World Trade Organization because of the slow movement of negotiations in Geneva. India has entered into some FTAs, and I have seen that the negotiations have been difficult, particularly with EU, though we had given enough space and mandate to our negotiators. We were almost there, but with Japan, with South Korea, with Singapore, the comprehensive economic partnership agreements that we entered, or cooperation agreements, CECAs and CEPAs as we call them, the trade has increased. People may say that imports have gone up, but at the same time, if you look at even the ASEAN, actually, if you remove the edible oil component, what we import, what we need, our exports have gone up more than the imports from the ASEAN group of countries. So I think that we have to continue on that path. And you're again correct that what about the plurilaterals, the mega trade agreements, like you have the TPA, which America is leading, and China will connect to that Trans-Pacific Agreement, and the TTIP, that is where the US and the EU will be there. We cannot connect to TTIP, but we can definitely at some stage look at, if we become part of APEC and we have interest in Pacific, then India should be at some stage considering that. Where we have connected in a big way, you'll be aware, and that's the time when we were in office. We took a conscious decision, though there were many skeptics within the system, because China is there. We are part of the East Asia Summit. That's ASEAN 10 plus 6. That's China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand. And a decision was to be taken in 2012, a final decision to launch the negotiations for the regional comprehensive economic partnership of Asia. That's RCEP. Now RCEP negotiations are on, and I'm convinced that once we conclude that and India gets its fair share, you will have a big connect of Asia Pacific, and that's where you can have future linkages. But my last word on this will be that India has to be careful that though we may have bilaterals, plurilaterals, the centrality of the WTO as a rule-based World Trade Organization must be kept intact.
I completely agree. We will take a few questions from the House. My suggestion and recommendation would be to kindly keep them short, crisp, and just make it a question. We have one right at the back. We have one at the back here. Hang on.
Sharma ji, Shreyas Bharadwaj, studying in BMA Munjal University, a BCom honors student. I still remember your speech in Parliament on FDI in retail. It was superb. Um, but my question is on a related subject. You talk about the hostility between the two ruling and opposition parties. But yes, I agree that there is a lot of hostility. But don't you think the hostility comes from wrong things done by both sides? Example, your TN president called the prime minister a gorilla, but nobody mentioned anything about it.
Let me tell you, at the senior leadership level, I think we have maintained the dignity of the offices whichever people have held. None of our senior leaders would be using any such word, because we respect institutions. We may have ideological differences, and we can be political opponents, but I don't look at our political opponents as enemies. We have good social relations. We talk to each other as people should, and all civilized societies and all mature democracies give that space. I will not say hostility per se. What I'm saying, it's for the government. Always, when we were in government, it was our responsibility to reach out to the opposition. And now, those who are in government, they should. But as I said earlier, we were very clear that when the insurance bill came up, and I took a clear view along with many of my senior colleagues, that it was our bill, we fought for it, and therefore we have to clear it. It went to the select committee, I was there, and now the rest is history. It was, to my mind, the biggest decision made, and I still tell this government, and in a light-hearted manner, that you have not rolled back the decision which we had taken on multi-brand retail. So please stand up, have the courage and say that yes, because it is still there, what we notified. They have to acknowledge it, then more investments will come.
Can you get a mic to Mr. Shami, General Shami Mehta, please? The mic here. Can you just pass this mic here?
My question relates to what has already been said, and I'm putting it very simply. Why do you have to stand where you sit, right or left in Parliament?
You see, that is what the parliamentary democracy is all about. It's not that everything which is initiated or every policy will get consensus or support across the board, because these are political parties which have their respective ideologies. So what we feel is correct will get support. For example, last time when we voted for the insurance bill, we voted with the BJP government. Let's not forget that. And some opposition parties did question that why is the Congress voting there. But you have to get up and explain. At the same time, there are some decisions of the government to which we are principally opposed. And that is where the opposition role comes in as an effective check, because check and balance is important in democracy. When you look at the presidential form of government, there are inbuilt checks to ensure a balance. Parliamentary democracy and cabinet form of government again have their inbuilt checks. Now, those have to be respected, because we cannot create hybrids, and it should never be accepted that everything which the government wishes, the entire opposition collectively will endorse. As I said, there has to be bipartisan understanding on many of the issues when it comes to India's economic development, India's industrialization, also the socio-economic empowerment of the people. I'm afraid that we have not actually consolidated or strengthened our investment in education and in R&D. I hope that is corrected. That's all what I'll say. We have spoken in Parliament during the budget debate with the kind of huge cuts in education, including primary education, including midday meal schemes, and also the social sector have been a matter of concern for everyone. initially, when I was speaking a few minutes ago, I was talking about the movement from villages to the towns and the fact that we do not have the infrastructure. So these are all national priorities for which there is no quarrel. What we need to do. I don't think there is any dispute or any divergence of opinion between the government and the opposition on all these matters.
Pawan?
I'll just take one question here. While you already elaborated on that issue of the nation becoming the manufacturing hub of the world, can you briefly outline the top 3 things that we need to do really to become that?
You see, first is that we should ensure the integration of vocational education or skills training with the mainstream education. B, create a partnership between the institutions which are engaged in this, the government and the industry, particularly when it comes to not the high-end technology when it comes to skills training, but also the basic skills where ITIs come in and not the IITs. And third, by 2020, we should ensure that all 16 manufacturing cities, this is the National Investment Manufacturing Zones, 4 of which were launched before the change of government, and the other 2 I'm sure will be launched. Dhulera was launched, Chandre Bidkin was launched. Dhulera is the largest. Once these 16 are up and running, and plus the 2 NIMs which are dedicated to electronic hardware, because that is another important area to my mind which India should do, given the fact that we have a strength in IT-enabled services, our dependence or over-dependence on imports for electronic hardware is going to hurt the Indian economy, because our imports will exceed the petroleum or the crude imports by 2020 if we do not arrest that. So I think this is the third thing which India must do. And maybe if I may mention, if just for the benefit of the youngsters, that we were trying our best how to get into the wafer chip fabrication, because for the without achieving that we won't reach or meet our objectives. So we did talk to the leading players in the world. I remember personally going to Texas to talk to the Texas Technologies. We were trying to motivate people, and then we realized that we had to do something more. A, to create the dedicated zones where no approval are required, and the industry investors, domestic or foreign investor, does not have to purchase land, take environment approvals. That's all done. There's prior approvals in place. But we had to give huge subsidies to make it attractive to engage with India on this front. So there are 2 consortiums which are created, and each consortium has a major global player, and subsidies of more than 53,000 crore. That was the package for the 2 consortiums, and we made it very clear that if any new consortium comes, they will also get the same treatment and the same subsidies, so that in the next 5 years we can actually be not entirely self-reliant, but near that.
Thank you. We've actually completely run out of time. I know that many more hands were raised, but we're running to a deadline, because of which, as some of you know, we've had to reschedule the event, including dropping the debate this year, which is in some ways is one of the most interesting parts of this 2-day summit. So I just want to conclude by thanking everybody who's been involved, all the participants, and we have a very diverse group in the participants. We've had 65 panelists and speakers come here in a day and a half. We have over 300 delegates made up of industry, business, think tanks, economists, civil society, academics, and students. So it's a very, very interesting and very diverse group. So which helped us also focus on the many dimensions of India over the next decade. There were a few key insights which came, which are quite interesting and they're quite telling. One was that India is impatient. Especially young India is impatient. They want things to move quicker, faster, move forward, take decisions, make mistakes if we have to, but just keep on moving forward. The other was that we need to make the growth more equitable. This is important for a nation as diverse as ours, both geographically and demographically, that we need to be better balanced as a nation. There was an issue brought up around urbanization, that smart urbanization really is the way to go. Whether we do it in these cities or the new cities, it's clear, by the way, the 100 smart cities that we are talking about cannot all be in a short term, all brand new cities. Some of this will be work which will get done in the current cities to make them better, some urban agglomerations, and a few of them will actually end up being brand new cities. So it will be a combination of these. And if you look at the expected migration that is coming, this is an absolutely essential requirement, almost one of the most important things India can do for itself over the next 15 years. Because if we don't do that, we are in trouble. It is also important, it was said, that the government needs to do some micromanaging of some large issues and projects, at least for some time until they are on track and running, and give us the traction that we need as an economy going forward. Also, it is important to get infrastructure right. The regulatory environment needs to keep abreast of the business environment that is changing worldwide. In some sense, we started up ahead, but we kind of got left behind. Business moved ahead faster. Overall, in the reform process, if you see, a lot of India has changed, a lot of India has reformed. There are a few areas which are kind of seem to have got left behind. The criminal justice system, for example, is one which is not reformed as much as some of the others. And there are a few other systems which are left. Those which did reform also need a review right now to make them more contemporaneous, yes. And the administrative system itself, the decision making and the process of decision implementation, both are areas which probably need to undergo an overhaul right now. The current Prime Minister has spoken about that in terms of making governance more effective, more efficient, using more technology. That was another session we had just before this, 2 sessions before this. We also had one which said business is looking for 3 C's: consistency, clarity, and credibility from the government. And those are important to create an environment where business can go out and focus on its own growth and turn India into a global economy. We also need to create networked enterprises. Small, medium, and large-scale enterprises need to network amongst each other much better than they're doing right now. Industrial clusters is a focus which is absolutely essential, as you also brought out. There was another interesting point brought out which said sometimes frameworks are more useful than the actual incentives. For example, the government needs to put a training and a certification mechanism which ensures corporates of a standard level of output from a person with vocational training. The Minister for Skills and Entrepreneurship was here, and he talked about this in an earlier session. India also needs to use its differently abled better than it's doing today. And 2 on that panel said we need to be called disabled, not differently abled. So everybody is differently able. So there were different aspects of that which were brought out, how they can become an important, productive part of society more than they have been for a long time. We need hard boundaries on what should be construed as that need to be drawn, what can be defined as civil acts, keeping in mind the interests of the public at large. It is responsibility of both the people and the administration to set these boundaries for activities that disrupt daily life, agitation, marches, VIP movement, etc., etc. How do you make the everyday life of people easier? Remove the corruption in the system, the petty harassment which takes place day to day. On health, there was an important and interesting discussion on how we can expand the healthcare and how we can improve quality of healthcare at a cost which is manageable that this nation can afford to pay. So we had a series, I'm just touching about some of them. We had a platform on empathy with sarpanches, students, policymakers together. A platform on diversity in thinking. Panelists of different ages, including the very young, as a part of this. So we've actually got an interesting insight, which will cull into useful information and send the documents back to government, to yourselves, and other experts and think tanks. And we hope this will be useful and valuable both for policy making and helping in implementation of ideas which are already floating around. I'd also like to thank all those who were involved in organizing this event. While we all sit here and enjoy the 2 days, you can imagine what goes into setting up an event like this. It's months and months of planning and hard work. And sometimes the changes which take place at the last minute can be quite disruptive. In spite of that, the team has been able to manage a very smooth day and a half. And the feedback that we've received from the audience has been quite encouraging and good. I would urge all those in the audience to send us written feedback on ideas, suggestions that you have to make this better going forward. What would you see more of? What would you like to see less of? What are the areas you think are missing and what we can add in terms of dimensions to this? Because we want to continue to make this an effective think tank, which will be neutral, which will allow ideas and views from all sides to be aired and then to be brought in for actual implementation wherever it is feasible and practical. Thank you all very much, and thank you for being here with us, Mr. Sharma. As always, a wonderful session. Thank you.
I'd request Mr. Pawan Munjal and Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal to please present a memento to Mr. Anand Sharma. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time to be a part of the Mindmine Summit. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to all our distinguished speakers and of course this wonderful audience here. We hope you've enjoyed being a part of the 9th edition of the Mindmine Summit. It's been a wonderful 2 days, power-packed, action-packed, a lot of riveting panel discussions and some inspiring Mindmine exchanges.